All right, AP World History, we're back to it. I'm going to try to keep this, as usual, brief as possible. See if I can get us through the rest of nationalism and a little bit of some industrial revolution for you. All right, so we left off, we were looking at nationalistic movements, mostly based in Europe. I think we looked at Italy, we looked at Germany, we looked at the Balkans, all that kind of Greece, all that kind of thing. So here's an example for you that's going on the other side of the world, and to show you that sometimes nationalism could also be displayed by people that Europeans probably would have viewed as being far more primitive. And that all kind of gets around here with the story of the Maori Wars. And here we go. And the Maoris were still are. They're still they still are a culture that you can find on New Zealand. They're not actually native to New Zealand at all. They come from Polynesia in the Pacific, and I think anthropologists have a pretty good idea when they kind of started making their way into New Zealand 1200s. There were indigenous people already there in New Zealand, but the Maori kind of overpowered them, I don't know, made them more or less kind of subjugated them to the Maori themselves, and so things kind of went along for a long time, and eventually, though, get the British showing up, and this kind of gets us into kind of still early 19th century when the British Empire was definitely growing and on the rise. And Great Britain, first of all, had colonized what's now Australia. They called it New South Wales. It was what they called a penal colony, and so the British would send when they had too many people living in their prisons back in England, they would ship them off there, and from there the British began to start to exert their influence a little bit further than New South Wales from Australia. And so pretty soon, they take New Zealand and make that part of their empire. The Maori people rebel, as it says there, and it's a nationalist rebellion. Again, they compared to the British, who have modern weaponry and all that sort of thing. The Maoris were still a relatively kind of a more primitive people. But still had a very, very well established culture, and even though they were transplants to New Zealand, they in the intervening centuries had created again really what would be a national identity, and so that's kind of what powers their rebellion against the British, and results in a series of wars that's fought over several decades, and but in the end, even though they have that identification, I think the long road of fighting one war after another against British military that had them outgunned, had them just technologically speaking, there wasn't a whole lot of comparison. And in the face of that, some of the Maori tribes began to kind of divide up, and you lost that unity, you lost that nationalism, and that helps to contribute eventually to the British defeating the Maori and exerting full control over New Zealand, which they would do for a number of years. Remind me when we get in class, and I will talk to you about the Maori and the Haka. Okay. One of those little side stories that will in no way, shape, or form ever show up on the AP test, but I don't know, if we don't learn about stuff like this, we'll just all go insane. So remind me about the Haka, all right? And we'll watch a little video here of the New Zealand modern rugby team putting on display some old traditional warfare traditions and rituals of the Maori people. All right. Story for another day, though. All right, that kind of gets us to the end of our spin through nationalism and nationalist movements. So understand what nationalism is, especially the way that it appears, in Unit 5 in our time frame. And then you've got all kinds of different examples to draw from in terms of how nationalism played out. Okay, unification movements, revolts, rebellions, yeah, all that sort of thing, right? That takes us into section 3, and the Industrial Revolution, which a lot of historians will tell you is what many believe to be the major turning point of human history. Okay, I know a lot of people would automatically just go to, oh, it must have been the World Wars or something like that, but no. This is an event that you can almost kind of draw this really pretty stark before and after line when it comes to history. And before it is a world that you and I we wouldn't have been able to hack it. No electricity, everything's by candlelight. We would have, no running water. We would have struggled. But the Industrial Revolution is what's going to really begin to modernize the world and get us a little bit closer to a world that you and I do recognize. All right. And so I guess, first of all, a quick definition there when we talk about what industrialization is, and we've talked about proto-industrialization back in the Song Dynasty and other times during Chinese history, and so this isn't the actual first time that we've talked about it, but that the key of that is that concept of the mechanization of production. Okay, that instead of work being done by human power and animal power, we're going to see the rise of machines that are going to be doing the work for us. And it will result in a plethora of political and social changes, some of which we still deal with the consequences of to this very day. All right. And so, again, kind of where we get into this, why this is such a big game changer. All right. The agricultural revolution. We talk about the agricultural revolution, Neolithic revolution, going way back in time when people make that original shift from hunting and gathering to starting to raise crops and farming and all that. But there's another version of it that takes place in the 18th century. And this is when we have this point in time in history where people begin to realize things like, soil can be preserved by using techniques like crop rotation, where every season you rotate what you're growing on your fields. You don't keep planting the same crop over and over. And every year you let a part of your field just rest. You don't grow anything. That's what that little fallow corner is up here. Okay, and you rotate that every year. You kind of shift things around. And so where you had fallow, where you just kind of allowed the weeds to grow and everything, you plow that all under and get it prepared, and you grow your wheat. And then where your potatoes were growing the year before, you let that go to fallow, and you just keep doing that. And what it does, it allows your soil to regenerate, and it keeps your fields where you can just keep growing. All right. And so that is one of the kind of, I wouldn't, not what we're going to call an invention, but new knowledge put to use. And then we've got, the invention of the seed drill. This is still, quasi-mechanization. You can see a picture of the seed drill right here, or if you want the complete breakdown so you can build one at home, there you go, right there. And really what it did was, you see it's all hitched to horses here, kind of a wagon wheel sort of a thing. And it would drive these cylinders into the ground, basically popping in little holes in the soil. And then someone could follow up behind him, this guy right here, and you'd drop seeds in those holes, and then you could cover them over, and that's a lot more as far as a time saver than having people go through like they did in the old days and just kind of manually stick a rod in the ground, create that little hole, drop the seed in, cover it in, take another step, drive the rod in the ground to produce another hole, drop in the seed. Here you've got, this thing is dropping in what, 10 holes at a time, and so it just speeds up the process. And like I said, a little kind of quasi mechanization. A big part of that 18th century version of the agricultural revolution is all these different crops now that are being introduced into Europe. and other parts of the old world from the new world, okay, via the Columbian Exchange. So yet another reason why the Columbian Exchange is so important in history is the role that it plays with helping to bring about what eventually will be the Industrial Revolution. All right. Okay. Moving on down here to CIR. I'm just going to shorten up Industrial Revolution. All right. And this is going to be a big shift that we will see happen in the 17th, 18th. I guess I should really narrow it down to 18th and early 19th century. If you looked in a lot of different places in Europe in particular, the rise of cottage industries, this is pretty much people working from home, people who had some kind of a specific craft or skill that they were good at. It could be, it could be working as a tinsmith and working with metals, or blacksmithing and making tools and horseshoes and things like that. It could be like you see the women there who are using a spinning wheel, or maybe as weavers, working with textiles and fabrics, which will play a big part in the Industrial Revolution. This is kind of what you're seeing was going on prior to 1700. Is that people who aren't working in the fields, who aren't directly as agricultural workers farming, many of them have these specialized skills like this, and usually they've been taught that by their parents, and it's kind of again, that's why they end up getting names that are connected to the jobs that they do. If you've ever known anyone with the last name of Weaver, well, somewhere down in the family line, someone did just that. They were a weaver. Same goes with anyone with the last name Smith, whether they were tinsmith, coppersmith, blacksmith, but they were doing something that worked in metals. If your last name was Fuller, you were probably working with cotton and using cotton as a kind of a filler material, and that kind of in making clothes, and then that kind of morphs into the name Fuller. So yeah, that kind of thing. The Industrial Revolution will put an end to all of this, because once you have mechanized means of producing these things, metal products and fabric and textiles, people working in cottage industries are not going to be able to compete with the low prices that factories are going to be able to produce things at. And so this concept of cottage industries, people working out of their little homes, out of their cottages, will be kind of undone by the Industrial Revolution. All right. Let's see here. All right, so some of the early innovations of the early Industrial Revolution. Give you some examples here. The spinning jenny, which was invented by a Brit named James Hargreaves. The spinning jenny was going to be a machine that pretty much used hydropower. Some of these first factories, if we can call them that, were built right next to streams or rivers, and they would put a wheel in there that wheel would then be basically the engine that would power these belts, like you see on this little illustration here, and then those belts would run these machines. And the spinning jenny, right there in basically undoing the job of weavers. You can see on this illustration these are basically spools of thread that are being filled by this machine. And so what one person sat and spent hours doing before in those cottage industries is now going to be done much more easily by machinery. Okay, the water frame, Richard Arkwright's invention, another, and you've got a kind of a illustration one over here, and this could be used for any kinds of machinery that you needed. If you needed to use, again, that water power to get something done, and through all of these kind of the system of kind of pulleys and and all these belts, you would be able to harness water power, hydropower, to run a machine. Okay, and this is going to be some of the first machines being made before the advent of steam power, and then that will change things later on in the Industrial Revolution. But the early version of it, yes, using a lot of hydropower. Okay, Eli Whitney, who actually was an American, because again, we're starting to get some little bits and pieces of America in the story here, and he comes with this concept of interchangeable parts. I think one of his first uses of this was with weaponry and things like that. I'm getting ahead of myself, aren't I? It's like, and then as I'm cruising along here, and suddenly I'm like, wait a minute, let me plug in some years for you, okay? Because it always is important to kind of keep things in a time frame. So let me back up to the Spinning Jenny. Spinning Jenny, there's different versions of when this was all came together, but most of them revolve around the years 1764 or 1765. All right. Maybe James was so excited with his invention that he wasn't being really specific about, when he was kind of making his breakthroughs. But kind of those 2 years where most historical sources will agree the spinning jenny was developed. Okay, a little trial and error there that came up with that machine. The water frame, 1769. That's a date that's not really in a whole lot of doubt. With the invention of the water frame. And Whitney patents his concept of interchangeable parts in 1798. And when he first does it, he's mainly focused on the firearms industry. And so it's the idea that, you can create these different parts that can be used in the creation of a rifle. Some of the parts can also be used for the building up of pistols, different kinds of weapons, and they use the same kind of parts. And then that'll be a concept that will be carried on into factories and big machines. Eventually, they'll end up doing the work of humans in those machines. Is just the whole idea of interchangeable parts, and pretty soon from there will be kind of what we call the division of labor, so that people have very specialized roles in the factories, those kinds of things. So eventually, by the 20th century, will get us to the concept that Henry Ford will nail down, and that is of the assembly line for producing things, just to streamline the whole production of factory goods. Ford, of course, famously does it with the car, right, the automobile. All right, moving from E, it will be Great Britain that will be the early leader in the Industrial Revolution. And I'll kind of just drop these in here, and this is kind of why it ends up being the British. Let's just go 1, 2, 3 here. And I think I got a couple more on the other slide. So first of all, they are very lucky in that England is, Britain is very, very blessed, I guess I should say, with a lot of their own mineral resources, namely coal. And that map that I already just kind of covered up there shows where there's lots of coal deposits in England and in Britain itself. This will be a early source for powering steam engines. People burn coal, basically as a replacement for burning wood. You burn coal to heat your home, burn coal to cook, those kinds of things. And so, the British have that. The British will also, as they are growing their empire, will also have some of these colonies that will also have mineral resources that they will be able to take advantage of and make use of. The British also have, again, this would kind of go back to some of that Jared Diamond kind of thinking. Again, they've got some geographic advantages. It's nothing that has to do with, whether they're, smart or anything like that. It's just where they happen to live. And Britain is very, crisscrossed with rivers, fast moving, slow moving, wide, skinny, a little bit of everything there. And those rivers are going to be key if we jump back up here to number 1 and number 2 to getting the whole Industrial Revolution off the ground. And before the invention of the steam engine, those rivers are going to be providing the power that's going to be running some of these first generation factories. All right. The British also have their Royal Navy. And by the time you're getting to the 18th century, it's well on the way to becoming the most powerful navy in the world. Okay. Kind of ironic. Great Britain's such a small little island country, but they kind of take a page from the Spanish, and, the British defeat the Spanish in their attempt to take over Britain with the Spanish Armada. But after that, the British begin to really lean into building up their own navy. What's important, and what does this navy have to do with the Industrial Revolution? It will be able to protect England, first of all, and Britain from any future threats. It will be able to protect sea lanes for British merchants who are going to be sailing in the natural resources, mineral resources from some of the colonies, and then sailing, basically import export, shipping out the product of these factories. And so it'll be the Navy that's making sure that all of this can be safely done. Right. And then two others over here, again, still linking back to why the British first. The British have done a pretty full embrace by the time we're getting into the 18th century of the concept of private property. This is important because the idea that property, businesses, all of that, that it was guaranteed. If you had bought it, if you had inherited it, it was yours. And that guarantee that is pretty much stitched up even by the British government itself is what gives people the confidence to continue to grow businesses, to invest. If we go back to like the joint stocks, that sort of thing, and the British will develop a fairly healthy economy that will encourage more and more people who can afford to do it to get involved in it. Right. So it's almost a little bit of that idea of capitalism, building wealth from wealth, a little bit of that going on again. And then three running there at you. First of all, in part because of the Columbian Exchange, in part because of some slowly changing improvements in health and sanitation. You do see the population of Britain growing quite rapidly. I think if you go back to about 1500, they had about 2.5 million people. By the time you get to 1700, it's about 5.5 million people. So they are in a rapid growth phase. Okay. The enclosure movement is something that happens in British history, and you can kind of look at it in the good and the bad. Nowadays, it usually gets viewed as kind of the bad. And it was the process in which, before the Enclosure Act, a lot of peasants could kind of there was all this common land that they could farm on. It usually actually technically somewhere legally belonged to someone, but it was land that had just been kind of defined as common. And so that kind of left it open to anyone that, if they wanted to farm it and they were maintaining it and keeping it up, that sort of thing. But landowners finally decided that, property is worth something. And if, we go back to number 4, yeah. And the enclosure movement was to start fencing in properties. What it did is it basically removed a huge option that a lot of the peasant class in Britain had in terms of a way of making a living. It forced a lot of those peasants off of land they had, in some cases, had been using for generations, and now they had to go and try and find a farm, a manor, something like that they could go work on, and typically low pay. And then some of them were going to try their luck heading off to more urban areas, which will coincide with the fact that England's urban areas are going to be starting to grow in the 18th century. And some of this, especially as the Industrial Revolution takes hold, we'll see that where factories are developed, usually people are going to want to live close to where the factories are. And so people start living there. Businesses that are going to service the people who live there, whether it's markets, whether it's whether it's for clothing them, pretty much all the kind of like the retail services, even things like inns and restaurants and taverns. You put all that together and you're going to have a little growing city that pretty soon could be a rather, large city. And so that concept of urbanization is something that is going to definitely take place in England, in Britain, and grow. And so that is also a big part of what is going to drive all of this along and why we see the Industrial Revolution have its beginnings in Great Britain. It will grow rapidly from Great Britain from there. It'll spread to the rest of continental Europe, and eventually we'll make it across the Atlantic here to the Americas, all right? And particularly in North America. Okay, what do I got? I got 6 minutes. Can I get through this? Maybe. Let's see. And so just on that very topic, okay, the spread of the Industrial Revolution. Let's jump in there and see how it looks in some other parts of the world. Well, okay, we'll stay in Europe first. and jump over to France. And hey, New Germany, okay, with shiny New Germany. Actually, the Industrial Revolution began to develop in Germany while it was still split into its states. But you've got two of the biggies that are going to come out of Germany, especially kind of eastern part of France, western part of Germany. A lot of coal mining that will be going on in there, and then eventually the Germans especially are going to really focus on the production of steel, and there'll be a stretch of time where some of the highest quality steel in the world is coming from the Krupps factory, Krupps, Krupps factories in Germany. Okay, and so yes, we've got that again. They're a little bit late to the game on this, especially the Germans, because of political factors. But once they jump in, they catch up very rapidly. All right. United States, they will make a huge contribution to the Industrial Revolution. My reference there to human capital is going to be the fact that the United States in the 19th century particularly will have one of the fastest growing populations in the world. Just in immigration alone, our population is is exploding. And we have plenty of opportunity. We need people. And so, this is a time when immigration, while there's still going to be, pushback and nativism and xenophobia that sometimes raises its ugly head, ultimately the United States needed people. And so, this human capital, these are going to be the laborers who are going to be running these factories. And so, yeah, you have that going on with the United States. Okay, Russia will also kind of tiptoe into the Industrial Revolution. They're not going to embrace, even though they have the potential is there, and they will. They'll build railroads like we got mentioned there, like the Siberian, the Trans-Siberian Railroad will be built. One of the more magnificent feats of railroading back in the 19th century. They'll also focus in on metal production. They have their own resources of coal, and so they're able to use coal engines to help kind of power up their steel and iron factories. But again, they don't take full advantage, and the vast majority of the Russian population is still going to be toiling away out in the fields. Going to be, it's going to be all about agriculture, but a little industry that is growing. Okay, and then let's flip it over to Asia and talk about Japan real fast. They will be one of the first Asian countries to really embrace modernization and industrialization. And the Japanese, after they are kind of dragged out of their isolation in the 1850s, famously by the United States, they immediately want to be like the West. They want to be like the United States, like those European countries. And so they're learning. They are studying the West, and they are learning from it. And they really do embrace the Industrial Revolution, mainly for military and economic strength. Okay. They have visions already in the 19th century of possibly creating an empire. And that will be something that will eventually put them on a crash course with the United States and some European countries. But that'll happen later in the 20th century. In these early days, yeah, they are the ones that grab hold of the lead. Very small, little island nation, but they're going to be the ones that are going to be all over it. All right. Colonialism, right? When we have all these kind of settlers starting to kind of move in, this is something that will, like it says there, play a role in the Industrial Revolution. Take a real quick look at India first in the 19th century. British East India Company. They are going to take more and more power over India, more influence over India, until by 1858, the British are able to establish a full colonial control over India. They will create what they call the Raj, the R-A-J, Raj, British Raj, which is kind of their term for crown rule over the colony now of India. Okay, and so a lot of the industry that is developed under British control, British rule, and what's being produced out of these factories is primarily going to profit the British first, and then Indian second. So you've got some examples there: shipbuilding industry, ironwork, so iron production, metal work, and then textiles, especially cotton. Which is going to compete with wool, which is the main textile coming out of most European countries, and cotton will be almost like revolutionary. This fabric that breathes and has all this different potential for it. Okay, but the British are going to here we go tightly control the economics in India. They see India as primarily there to make profit for the British. And so they even shut down some of the elements of the Indian economy that would potentially be competing with the British economy, and sometimes some of the things being produced there, they say nope, no more, because you're not going to compete directly against us now that you are ours, that you're our colony. And so going further into the 19th century, the British are going to just exert more and more control over India politically, economically, that sort of thing. Okay, and that's kind of what I'm talking about there. The British will heavily tax the Indian people, and again, place all kinds of rules and restrictions on Indian trade, so that it is made very, very clear that it is the British who are going to profit from India. They will profit first, and whatever is left over after that, then the Indian people themselves can have it. And as you can probably guess, there's not going to be much left over. Okay, all right. And that gets me to where I need to be with slightly over 30 minutes. And next we'll be looking at section 5, technology of the industrial age. That's where we'll start getting into steam and all that kind of stuff. But enough of that. And yeah, that'll cover us for now. Okay, next time, hopefully in the classroom. See ya.